Happy Friday, everyone. In fact, it's happy Flashback Friday, right? We are here on Flashback Friday with our brand new show. Well, it's not brand new because we had it on our show previously, but now it's on its own, and we are here for Hot Tag. So you guys remember the Hot Tag segment that we had on our show the last few weeks, and Brandi is kind enough to do that segment for us. Well, we are now bringing it to you every Friday, and we're calling this the Flashback Friday Hot Tag. So it is that time, guys. You requested this one. You said your favorite gimmick of all time was the Undertaker. Well, Brandi is here, and this one is going to go more than one show because the Undertaker's career is long and legendary. So let's tag in. Brandi, are you all set to go? Because I'm tagging you in to start this long Undertaker discussion.
I'm ready to hop over the ropes, you guys.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, take it away, Brandi. Start us out.
Okay, well, Mr. Undertaker, his real name is Mark Calloway. Most of you guys know that. But what I did not realize is that he is 55 years old, gentlemen.
Wow.
So I understand why he doesn't want to keep doing these matches. And I have some really interesting tidbits for you guys this week. I hope you're excited. First of which is his first ring name and his first manager, which completely floored me. He started in Texas. His first match was with Bruiser Brody, if you can believe that, at the Texas Sportatorium, and he premiered as Texas Red, managed by no other than Mr. Percy Pringle III himself, who would later become, do you guys know?
Percy Pringle was, I remember him really well. He became Brother Love. What the heck am I thinking? He became Paul Bearer.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Yes. So he kind of wrestled around in Texas, and he did some stuff in Tennessee. And when he was in like the Tennessee area, he was actually managed some by Dutch Mantel. And he wrestled as the Punisher. Anyway, so he finally got a deal with WCW. And so he goes in 89, and he's Mean Mark Callis. And I loved when I found out who gave him that name. Terry Funk.
Oh, okay. That's cool.
Yeah, so Terry Funk just comes in all around, doesn't he? And so he did a few singles matches in WCW, and Sid was injured, so they decided to put him in the Skyscrapers with Danny Spivey, who would also later become Mr. Waylon Mercy.
And there you go.
I know, there's connections everywhere, right? So the Skyscrapers disbanded when Mr. Spivey had a disagreement on his pay amount, and so the other Skyscraper was replaced with a masked figure, and then shortly after that, Undertaker left for the WWF. And there's a story that Hawk later told Vince McMahon, "You got the right Skyscraper, Vince."
Nice.
I know. So the Undertaker premieres with the WWF in 1990, most notably for Survivor Series, but first he was on some house shows as Kane the Undertaker, managed by none other than Brother Love.
There you go. I thought it was earlier than 90. That's crazy. Wow, okay. That's pretty cool. I had no idea. I thought it was literally in the 80s that he came around, but yeah, wow. That's
he was still in WCW in the summer of 90.
Okay. Wow.
And
that's
then
great.
he
Yeah,
then he goes to WWF.
I will never forget his debut ever. Like literally, it's one of the wrestling moments that I will never forget because I mean, it literally took my breath away seeing that. And I mean, again, watching wrestling in the 80s and all the characters that were there, with everyone that they had back then, you just never saw anything that looked like him.
No, not at all. Not at all. And he's redheaded, so that's another reason why I love The Undertaker.
He certainly is,
So,
yes. Yes, and he had long flowing red hair back then.
yes.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
So he comes out as the secret member of the $1 Million Man's team. And $1 Million Man ends up being the sole survivor. And there's another thing that also happened that night that's completely unforgettable. The gobbledygooker.
Oh, God. Well, I think Vince McMahon may want to forget that.
Yeah.
Not too sure that other people want to remember that. Yeah, in fact, Vince brought that up when they had that little DX thing with Triple H too. So yeah, I think he may want to forget that.
They should have just had The Undertaker beat him up.
He could have just had him bury him in a casket and be done with it.
There you go.
I absolutely love the interview that The Undertaker did with Steve Austin on the Broken Skull Sessions, when he talked about Vince trying to come up with his gimmick, and when he got the phone call, he was dreading that he was going to be this thing, whatever this thing was that came out of the egg. He's like, I'm going to be Eggman. I'm going to be the Eggman.
Man. Oh, man, that would be awesome.
Yeah, that would have been great. The gobbledygooker would have given birth to The Undertaker.
That would have changed history, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Oh, awesome.
Oh my God. So, guys, it's a little late, so that should explain a lot. So The Undertaker goes around, for a few months just doing house shows, not really appearing on TV very much. He's still being managed by Bruce Pritchard. And so Vince kind of gives Bruce Pritchard this kind of ultimatum and says, okay, you can either manage The Undertaker or you can be in the office. And Bruce said, I want to be in the office. So they pair him up with Paul Bearer. And it was a couple of people's idea. It was Bruce's. It was Pat Patterson's. They said, oh, you have to meet Percy Pringle. And so he came in, and Vince kind of came up with his character. Said, you have to dye your hair black, and you have to have this very pale skin. But the interesting thing about Paul Bearer was he was an actual mortician.
Wow.
He was an actual mortician.
He fits the part then. There you go.
So these were not work-in body bags and caskets and urns. These were shoot body bags, caskets, and urns.
Wow. That's cool. They actually use real stuff. There you go.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And so The Undertaker, he works with a lot of jobbers at first to really establish his dominance. And his first really interesting feud, which will end up in his first appearance at WrestleMania, is with Jimmy Snuka.
Okay.
And so he, of course, beats Jimmy Snuka at WrestleMania. And then he kind of moves on and has this feud with the Ultimate Warrior. And I don't know if you guys remember this iconic moment on the funeral parlor where Brother Love is there too, but Undertaker puts Warrior in a casket. And Warrior just freaks out,
Oh, I think I do remember that. Yep. Okay. Yeah. I do remember.
There's an interesting story about that. The casket had to be shopped for because they had to make sure it would fit the Ultimate Warrior. So one of the Road Warriors goes along with Vince and Bruce Pritchard, and of course Paul Bearer, because he's about the same size. And so they have him lay in the casket to make sure it'll fit. I guess Ultimate Warrior didn't want to be there that day. And Vince gets in the casket. There's a picture floating around somewhere on the internet with Vince in the casket. Bruce gets in the casket. And so that's how they pick it out. And they had to have Paul Bearer because then, and I pray even now, that it's not legal to buy a casket or body bags or urns unless you have an actual dead person.
Oh, boy.
I know. So I hope there's nobody, around that's going, I want a coffin as a coffee table. But, I know. Except for the Undertaker. He can have a coffin as a coffee table if he wants one. So
Man.
they fancy this casket up for Ultimate Warrior. They put more padding in it. They put extra pillow stuffing, and they put Warrior symbol on the cabinet, on the coffin. And Bruce Pritchard says, believe it or not, caskets are not comfortable. And I'm thinking, who's going to come back and tell you?
Yeah, right. Yeah. How is anyone really going to know that?
I know.
Okay.
I know. So that's one of my favorite stories.
That's funny.
That I found. But this was also the funny part. So the idea is that you hear the air being sucked from the coffin, and the Undertaker's clawing and trying to get Ultimate Warrior's clawing and trying to get his way out. And so guys come from the back and they start beating on the casket, with crowbars and sledgehammers. And somebody says, I have a drill. And so the funny thing is that Ultimate Warrior was not a popular person at that point in time. And so people are, laying in on this casket. And anyway, they finally get him out. But I thought that was pretty good people were trying to get back, Ultimate Warrior by really jostling him around in the casket.
Sure, he didn't really like it or find it very comfortable either. So there you go.
So that's one of my favorite things.
That's funny.
And so then we get to closer to WrestleMania 8, and Undertaker is going to fight Jake the Snake Roberts, because they had been kind of not partnered together in a tag team sense, but they had been partnered together, in promos or running in on each other's matches. Well, Undertaker is going to be turned babyface. And so during a segment on the funeral parlor, Jake the Snake is going to throw a snake on Miss Elizabeth, and Undertaker stops him. Because you do not touch Miss Elizabeth. And that's how Undertaker turned face the first time.
Okay. I remember that feud too, because I remember thinking, at that time, they were two of my favorite wrestlers. So, but I remember that because then I remember thinking how they're going to do this, because they're both bad guys.
Yes.
So I was wondering how that was going to go on, because unlike today, you don't see a lot of that. Sometimes you see more of it today than you did back then, where sometimes they'll just go face versus face, or they'll go heel versus heel, but you didn't see it much at all back then. So, yeah.
So I thought that feud was really cool.
Yep.
Because, Jake the Snake, he was kind of a darker character too.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, The Undertaker wins at WrestleMania. And he faced Hulk Hogan for his first championship opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And so Hulk does these promos, and he says, you will never kill Hulkamania. You can, Hulkamania will always survive. And I want to go, Hulk, do you remember the NWO?
Yeah, right. Yeah, little did we know.
I know. So Undertaker beats Hulk, and at that time, Undertaker becomes the youngest ever world champion. But a couple of weeks later, Hulk wins back the title, but Jack Tunney at the time, who was considered the president, I guess, on television of the company, says, well, neither wins really happened the way they should have, so we're going to vacate the title. And then it later becomes that Royal Rumble where Ric Flair won, and
Yep.
that's how he won the title.
Yeah, I was I think it was weird at that point, because I was a huge Hogan fan in the 80s, but at that point I was probably a bigger fan of Undertaker then, so I was not at all disappointed that he beat him. Because again, if that would have happened back in the 80s, I would have been furious that he lost, but I wasn't that upset that he won that match. So yeah, I remember that.
And
Me
can you
either.
guys imagine if something like that happened today?
Oh
How the
boy.
fans of today would react to that?
The Hogan loss or the vacating of the belt?
The vacating of the belt, the way that it was done.
Yeah, you know what?
There would be a riot.
That kind of stuff, again, that's something too that used to happen a good amount.
Yeah.
Like, I think when they just back themselves into corners, like we see happen a lot today, they would do that where they would just, now, I mean, we're seeing it now with Sami Zayn, because Sami Zayn,
I was about to say.
yeah, because he I think he just said he wasn't coming in to wrestle, I think, at this point because of the virus. And so they stripped him of the title. But you didn't see that. You don't see that much. But they did it back then. Like I said, I think it was just because they had a result that happened where, you know, Hogan won, and I guess they kind of thought that was going to be good because the Undertaker was gaining popularity at the time, but then there was probably still a big group of fans that were behind Hogan yet from the 80s, so it probably didn't work out well, and they just thought, you know what, we're just not going to give either one of them the titles because they got backed into a corner. But yeah, you don't see that much.
No. And here's one thing that's interesting. I'd like you guys to take on it. The Undertaker was considered a horror character back then.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I look back on it now thinking he didn't really get really macabre until the Attitude Era to me.
Right. Yep.
So would you have considered him a horror character then?
I think I did because just because of his look. I mean, you're talking the 80s, 90s, so you had a lot of the movies that Jeff and I talk about, like the slasher movies and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of them had these big, tall, imposing guys that would come after you. So he almost kind of reminded me of a combination of Michael Myers and Jason because he was a big dude, but he had a pale face and, the long hair, the black, the wore black, obviously. So I kind of did. Jeff, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I did, and I think it's mostly because of what you just said, but also the supernatural type things that would happen, and then you get the urn thrown into it, and early on, he just really didn't speak very much. So, that going back and listening to some of his interviews and listening to him say, people would actually ask him, "Hey, dude, are you dead? Like, are you really dead?" So, I would consider it. Yeah, I would consider it that just because of those elements. But I just think that that's hilarious. I mean, I know growing up when I watched him, the first time I saw him in my weird little twisted mind at that point, I thought it was the coolest thing ever. My mom would be like, "Why do you like that scary dude? Like, why in the world do you like him?"
Yep.
I'm like, "Mom, because he's so cool." And it was so different because, I've said this before. I grew up, on NWA and everything around this area. And you really didn't see any kind of gimmicks like that. You saw the larger than life personas. You had Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen and Sting, but you never really saw anything.
Forster.
Right. That's right. Double A.
Love it.
So, you didn't see anything like this. So it was so different. And that's what really made me gravitate towards it, is because it was just completely different than anything we had ever seen.
And here's a couple. Oh, I'm sorry, Joe.
No, I was just going to say, I agree. And again, even with me, where I grew up with WWF, and you did have all those personalities, but again, you didn't see horror characters really. And I mean, at that point I was fascinated with that stuff. Cause I mean, that's my late teens, early 20s probably. And I was into like horror stuff big time. So again, you didn't see any of that until, he got there in that kind of a way, like Jeff said, like the supernatural aspects of it and everything. Yeah. Yep.
Well, here's a couple of interesting facts I hope everybody likes. The eye roll just kind of happened one day, and somebody said, "You have to do that. This has to be a part of your character," where he rolls his eyes in the back of his head.
Yep.
I guess he was just in conversation with somebody one day and just did it, and they're like, "Oh my gosh!" And
guys, that is not easy to do, by the way. And
I don't imagine.
the reason I know that is because I'm a big Kiss fan, and Gene Simmons used to do that as well with his demon character. And so, being the naive, stupid young kid that I was, used to try to do that many, many times back when I was in my early teens. And yeah, it doesn't work out really well. And you end up making yourself very dizzy, and you have a hard time seeing after a little bit of time doing that. So yeah, I wouldn't suggest anyone going out there and trying that, by the way.
That's funny. I have a prosthetic eye, and if I tried to do that, my eye would pop out.
Oh yeah, no, that wouldn't be a good thing either. Yes, no. Yeah, that would be that. Nope, I could totally understand that.
Okay, so the sit-up, you think the Undertaker is beaten, and then all of a sudden he rises from the ashes. And so that did come from Michael Myers. You guys, a lot of people think it's a Jason thing, but no.
You know what? That's amazing. Now I know exactly where that came from.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the original Halloween.
Yep.
That's the behind the. You remember that, Jeff? That's the behind the couch. That's the behind the couch sit-up.
Yeah,
he was laying on the floor in back of Jamie Lee Curtis, and Jamie Lee Curtis is on the couch, and then all of a sudden you just see him sit right. Oh wow, that's awesome.
That is.
Yep.
That's
so
really cool.
Not Jason, but the original.
Yep.
And
that's awesome.
The first body bag match that he has is with the Ultimate Warrior. They called it the Body Bag Challenge at first, and then it became a body bag match. And they started that because coffins were too expensive.
And the Ultimate Warrior obviously freaked with the last coffin match.
Of course, yeah.
I probably had to stay away from that.
Yeah. So, and then the next, big Ultimate Warrior. Golly, guys, I've got Ultimate Warrior on the brain. Undertaker. I just insulted the Undertaker. The next big Undertaker feud was with Giant Gonzalez.
Oh, I remember him. Yep. Yes.
Do you remember?
Gonzalez, yes, very well. Mm-hmm. Very well.
I'm glad I don't.
He used to wear those spandex tights. The spandex. I think it almost was supposed to look like he was supposed to be hairy and like this big bear of look. I don't know. I don't know what they were going for with those tights, but they were really bad.
Can I just say this? And I apologize for our younger listeners. You may want to plug your ears. They had the hair in all the wrong places.
I agree.
It was so bad. And, again, I used to watch these guys on Saturdays and everything. And my mom, I remember the first time I saw Giant Gonzalez, and my mom comes in there and she's like, "What is that?" And I said, "It's Giant Gonzalez." And she's like, yeah. And she's like, "I thought this was appropriate for kids. I guess not."
How he agreed to wear that stuff, man. That guy must have I guess he was a trooper, the fact that he did. But man, we were just talking to a wrestler buddy of mine in an interview, and Jeff and him were talking about bad gimmicks. Well, there's a really bad gimmick. Like the poor dude had hair on his face. So then they're like, "Well, you're going to be dressed up kind of like a Sasquatch type guy with hair all over spandex." And I'm like, "Oh man, that's really bad." Really bad.
Yeah. And before he was Giant Gonzalez, he was Elegante in WCW. Yes. And there's been a couple WCW people who have said he really did have a lot of hair.
I'm sure he did. I don't doubt that at all. But I mean, you could kind of not have that as part of his spandex on his suit. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Man.
So Undertaker wins the match against Elegante at the next WrestleMania, actually by a disqualification because Giant Gonzalez or one of his cohorts used chloroform.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the acid. I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Undertaker would wrestle, him back and forth. I think Kamala was even in there at some point.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep. But what I really want to get to next, and a lot of people did not like these matches between Yokozuna and Undertaker. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I loved the rivalry. I loved how afraid Yokozuna genuinely seemed when he was doing vignettes for The Undertaker, or, they're doing appearances on Superstars. And, I thought you couldn't have a better pairing at that point, especially when the WWF is going through such a difficult time then. They had gone through the steroid trials. They had gone through some harassment, allegations. They were losing money. So I can't imagine a greater pairing at that time than Undertaker and Yokozuna. And so they have this Royal Rumble match. And so it appears that Undertaker has been killed and that his spirit will come back. But what I don't understand is, if he's already dead, how is that possible?
Well, yeah. They didn't think that through very well, but yep. Yeah. Well, it is wrestling, so you can you can kind of imagine all different scenarios, but yeah.
I know.
I agree.
So Undertaker has to go away for a little while. He has an injury. He's not a part of WrestleMania 10. And we start to get the clips from $1 Million Man that, wait, the Undertaker has been seen. There is an Undertaker. He hasn't died. And so you start to get the clips of, obviously, the Underfaker. But this is true. They didn't let him talk. They would have Mark Calloway actually speak the promo parts, and the other guy would just kind of mouth it. And they tried to make him look as much like the Undertaker as possible. He was in some of Undertaker's old gear. They put lifts in his shoes so he would be closer to the same height. There's a rumor out there that he was actually a relative of the Undertaker's, but I have not found anything to substantiate that.
Now, was that because he was still hurt at the time that they brought this character in?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. He was still healing from an injury. And then they start the Leslie Nielsen vignettes. Do you guys remember that?
Oh, boy.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Yes, I do.
Where he's trying to get the truth behind the Undertaker, and where is he? And that was great stuff. Bruce Pritchard has come out and said that Leslie Nielsen was his favorite celebrity that he ever worked with in the wrestling business.
That's funny.
And I think that says a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've heard things. I mean, I've read things about him. A lot of people said he was a comedic genius. They said he could come up with things right off the top of his head. And I can believe that, because watch some of the airplane movies that he was in, and you could believe that. And they said a lot of those jokes that he came up with on his own. So yeah, that's awesome.
That's amazing.
Yep.
So Undertaker is able to come back, and he and the Underfaker, and that name came from the fans. WWF did not come up with the Underfaker moniker.
Oh, jeez.
That came from the fans. So he and Undertaker are finally going to have this standoff, this stare down at SummerSlam. And the interesting thing about that was WWF had made a big deal with Domino's at the time. They had gotten something close to $300,000 for the advertising. Well, what Domino's did was, even back in June and July, they're sending out pizzas with the little flyer for SummerSlam, and you have the two Undertakers on the flyer. But the match hasn't exactly been set up yet.
Oh, boy.
I know. So it's like, oops.
Oh, boy.
So SummerSlam finally comes. They have the face-off. They have the stare-down. It's very clear who's the fake Undertaker and who's the real Undertaker. And, of course, the real Undertaker is victorious.
Yep, I remember that too.
Yep.
He's victorious. And then later, at Survivor Series, he has another match with Yokozuna. And he is, he's come back from the dead. And he's redeemed himself.
Well, there you go. See, yep.
And to me, that was just, that's great storytelling, because you don't necessarily have matches that go from, or feuds that go from January to November these days.
No, not at
and
all.
And they kept it alive, in vignettes and promos, and talking about even when the Undertaker wasn't there and wasn't able to wrestle. So I really love that. And at the end of this match, a few other wrestlers, come out and they try to help, and, Undertaker's just fighting them off. And then he takes Fuji's flag and breaks it in half and lays it over Yokozuna, and he's beaten.
Yep.
Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I remember that. Yep, I remember that. And yeah, to your point, storylines don't get dragged out much at all anymore. When we talk about Bray Wyatt, a lot of this stuff that he's doing and we've talked about this as well on Abby's, where people are they just want instant gratification today, and they don't want things dragged out. But look, this is the kind of stuff that leads to greater and greater things. And all you have to do is go back and watch some of this stuff that Brandi's talking about, because it's a much, much greater reward that you get at the end of these long storylines. So, don't be so fast to just want everything done right away, because a lot of times when these are being done and done well, the payoff is amazing.
Absolutely. And it's worth it. It's worth the investment.
Yep, absolutely.
So I'm going to bring up something that might be a little bit controversial. The Clique is probably one of the most famous backstage factions that there are. But there's maybe a lesser known one called the Bone Street Crew. Have you guys heard of this?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it sounds familiar, but I'm probably not as familiar with it as I could be.
It's the Undertaker's backstage gang. It's Undertaker, it's Papa Shango, it's Yokozuna. And so these guys, they're in the back, they're playing dominoes, they're doing different stuff. And you eventually realize, hey, this is the Undertaker's crew. And so they name themselves the Bone Street Crew. And they have BSK tattooed somewhere on their bodies.
Oh, that's cool.
I love it. Yeah, I love that.
Wow, that's cool.
I love that.
I don't think anybody would mess with that crew, I could tell you that.
No. I think the Clique were probably bowing down.
Oh, I would think so, yeah. Yeah, I would think so.
Yes. Okay, so that brings me to a member of the Clique. Do you guys remember one of the most famous Undertaker moments to me is you have Kevin Nash in a match with Bret Hart. Okay. So you're not sure who's going to win. And all of a sudden, the Undertaker has put a hole in the canvas of the ring, and he comes up and he grabs Diesel and he takes him under, and you think he's taking him straight to hell.
Yep.
And Diesel comes back up with these wide eyes, and you think, what has he seen?
Yep. That's amazing because, and again, the younger people who are listening, you got this with The Fiend last year. And again, something you don't see very often. So you got this with him when Bray came up through the ring and grabbed Seth and pulled Seth underneath. Now Seth got away. So he didn't get him all the way down there, but the smoke came out of the bottom, and they had it lit up red underneath there and the whole thing. And then he did it again with Daniel Bryan, where he sliced off his hair. So this isn't something you see much. So yeah, guys, so there you go. Something historical that is playing into Bray's character today. So there you go.
Absolutely. So, and the Dan Spivey connection.
Yep.
There's that. And,
yep.
but if you guys really want to see something cool, go back and find that. It's on the network. And Diesel, to me, didn't have a lot of shining moments, but that was one of them.
Yep.
That was definitely one of them. And so later in the year, I believe at SummerSlam, there has to be this match between The Undertaker and Bret Hart, you know, over this whole Diesel thing. And Shawn is the special guest referee. And Shawn goes to hit Bret and hits The Undertaker. So that's one of my more favorite moments too, is you have the classic "I missed you" chair shot.
Oh yeah, yep.
Yeah.
That's still a thing. If you ever want to get a feud going or something, you do that, where you just, you know, you have somebody go up and look like they're going to hit the right person and they miss and hit the wrong person. Well, yeah, then all of a sudden you got a feud going. So, yep.
And so, you know, around this time, Undertaker's wrestling a few different people. You know, he's wrestling Kama. He's wrestling King Kong Bundy. He's wrestling, you know, several other people. He has, you know, a couple matches with Vader. And one of the funniest things to me is there's this pay-per-view called It's Time. It's one of the In Your Houses. And Vader's not even on the pay-per-view. But Undertaker faces the Executioner in that one.
Yep. Okay.
So there, you know, there's several just funny things to me that happened around that time. And so we've about gotten to one of my favorite parts, you guys. The appearance of Mankind.
Oh boy. Well, sure.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
He showed up after WrestleMania, and he would kind of interfere in Undertaker's matches, or kind of have brawls with him into the crowd and into the back of the arena. And then they finally are going to have a match. They're finally going to have a match. And it was the Boiler Room Brawl. Do you guys remember that?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yes, I do.
I remember, I believe it was Todd Pettengill at the time, because it would have been after Sean Mooney, and Todd Pettengill, you know, they keep going back to him. It's when they used to do the pre-shows, and they would go back and forth to him. Well, Todd, what do you see? And he just kept saying, it's dark.
Yep.
And it's ominous.
Yep, I remember. You know, that was an odd pairing to me. It really was, because Undertaker had always been paired up against big dudes, like really, really big guys. And when he got paired up with Foley, it was just an odd pairing. Now, I get it. It was because of their characters, obviously, Mankind and Taker, and again, the whole horror thing. And again, you want to have a call out to Nightmare on Elm Street, Jeff, there you go.
Yes.
Having a Boiler Room Brawl. I'm sure they got a lot of that from, you know, Freddy Krueger in the Boiler Room. So, but yeah, it just seemed like an odd matchup to me, but it turned out to be really, really good.
And from what I understand, Mick wanted his mask to be somewhat modeled after the mask that Anthony Hopkins wore in Silence of the Lambs.
Well, yeah, that makes sense.
And it ended up being what it, you know, ended up being. But I mean, just the vignettes with Mick, and he's holding the mouse, you know,
Yes.
and he's pulling out his hair, and he's saying, you know, Undertaker, you know, just wait, you know, and he does these creepy vignettes, and he has the ethereal music. And anyway, so they have the Boiler Room Brawl match, and it's dark, and it's ominous, and it's wet. And so it's kind of difficult for them to portray it, I think, as well as it could have been portrayed with the camera work at the time. But I think for the most part, it was a success. I remember sitting at home and watching the pre-show and begging my dad, please, I want to know what happens. So no, I didn't get to watch it. But anyway, it's one of my favorite ideas between he and The Undertaker. So the next match they have is the Buried Alive match. And from what I understand, this is, you know, one of the first times this has been done. And so they go to film it, and they go to film it at the cemetery, and they dig the hole. They figure out how it's going to be made safe, and where Mankind or the Undertaker are not going to get hurt. And by this time, Paul Bearer is aligned with Mankind, and so it's raining, and they're going to film this vignette before the match, and Mick slips into the hole. And they tell Mick, just stay down there, we'll get the shots we need. And it's when he looks up at Paul Bearer and says, Uncle Paul, this hole's too short for the Undertaker. And you realize at that point when he says that, oh, the Undertaker's been the one out there digging the hole, and it's for Mankind. And so the match happens, and Paul Bearer hits the Undertaker with the urn, and the Undertaker goes into the grave. And I think, are they trying to kill him again? And,
oh man.
But they made sure that, they had oxygen down there. It was perfectly safe for Undertaker and Mankind. They had oxygen. But I mean, this was real dirt. They were really, buried when they're having these matches. And at first, when they show the cemeteries and do tombstones on the sets, they're real tombstones. But then, the powers that be said, well, somebody might get hurt. And so that's when they start doing the gimmick tombstones. I thought that was great. Like, that's you're awesome. Just now figuring out a multi-thousand-pound piece of granite could fall on somebody.
That's awesome.
I know. But that's really, that really ignited, to me, the Mankind Undertaker feud.
Yep. Well, listen, guys, we are going to, so as we said earlier in the show, we're going to make this 2 parts because there's no way Brandi could talk for the next 3 hours, and we're doing this late at night, and we don't want to keep her up for the next 3 hours. So we're going to make this a double show. So we're going to stop it right here, and we're going to continue at this part for you guys next week. So, so I hope you are enjoying this look back on what is a historic, legendary career of who's going to go down as one of the most remembered, most coveted, legendary wrestlers ever in the sport. We all know that his show is on the network now, and you're getting a different part of that every week. We've already seen 2 parts. We'll be seeing the 3rd part after this show airs. So listen, we hope you enjoyed this as much as we did. We all love this character, and I'm sure you guys all do too, as you asked for it. So again, Brandi, thank you so much for your research and everything like that. Do you have a book for the guys today before we get out of here?
Of course I did. You guys, I had a couple of different books in mind before, and then I really thought about it, and I want to recommend Lex Luger's book, Wrestling with the Devil. I think it's an appropriate title for an appropriate subject, and really, you will not be wasting your time. The audio version is great. I'm sure the print version is great. So, enjoy. You get an amazing story.
There you go, guys. That's awesome. That's awesome. And hey, listen, we hope you enjoyed this new episode of Brandi's show. Again, like I said, we're going to have this every Friday on Flashback Friday, and we're going to have it at 6 o'clock on Friday, 6 Eastern time. And we're going to be looking back at things that you guys want to look back on. So again, we had $1 Million Man. Now we're doing Undertaker. So listen, guys, whatever you are interested in for down the road, let us know. The same thing with if you have any books or anything like that you want to have us have Brandi talk about, or you want to suggest, let us know that too. And yeah, we will see you guys next Friday. And don't forget, well, nope, we're going, okay. Now, don't forget next week, we're going to have this again, and as we will every single Friday. So from Jeff and myself and from Brandi, we're going to tag you out now.
All right, I'm out, guys. Thanks
Okay.
for not having a body bag.
Well, I guess the body bag is better than the casket in the long run. I think we learned that. So maybe the body bag would be a little more comfortable than the casket. So
Yeah, that's true.
there we go. All right, guys. Hey, take care, and we will see you again next week for Brandi's Hot Tag. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we will talk to you soon.